The company headquarters stood tall in glass and angles, a structure designed to impress. From the outside, it looked untouchable: polished reception, marble floors, sleek lighting that hummed softly over corridors filled with movement. Everyone moved like they had a purpose. But purpose, lately, had become something thin. Something rehearsed. Something fragile. Behind the glass, beneath the language of press releases and investor decks, the company was bleeding. Quietly. Internally. Co-bases fractured across time zones. Products half-launched, riddled with bugs. Deadlines missed and rewritten, then missed again. But no one admitted it out loud. Not in meetings. Not in reports. Instead, they padded the language. They masked instability with optimism. They hired firms to generate new words for old problems. And still, nothing worked. When he walked through the lobby, no one noticed. Not really. He wore no badge. Just a forwarded email, a name referenced in a thread, a suggestion made out of desperation. The receptionist asked him who he was there to see. He gave the name of someone who hadn't replied to his message. She let him through anyway, because he said it with enough quiet certainty that it didn't occur to her to question it. He stepped into a space designed for performance. Open-plan workstations, silent huddles behind glass. People moved with curated urgency, but the fear lingered beneath it. He sat in an empty conference room for 20 minutes before anyone arrived. When they did, they didn't shake his hand. They looked at his shoes, listened to his name, then read his resume, not with curiosity, but with confirmation bias. No brand-name schools. No Tier 1 consultancies. Just a string of freelance contracts and infrastructure rebuilds in places they'd never heard of. They didn't ask what he knew. They asked who referred him. When he told them it was someone from the product side, someone junior, their posture shifted. The most senior person in the room leaned back, fingers steepled. "We're operating at a very high level here," he said. "This isn't the kind of work you can walk into without context." He nodded. Didn't argue. They dismissed him politely, then stayed behind in the room to talk about next steps. He walked out into the hallway. Didn't leave. He made his way down to the IT floor, quiet, ignored, underfunded. Found a workstation no one was using. Plugged in. He opened the live logs. Watched for 3 minutes. Then saw it, an error loop so simple it would have been funny if not so expensive. The firm they had hired to rebuild the core systems had deployed middleware with recursive calls that crashed every time network latency spiked. They didn't fail gracefully. They just died without alerts. He patched it. Didn't say anything. Just sent a single message to the product lead. "Try now." Within minutes, servers that had been choking for weeks began to stabilize. Teams noticed. Not right away, but in the slow way engineers notice when they stop being paged. When emails slow. When fires go out without anyone running. He didn't wait for praise. He stayed at the desk, opened the next log, and kept going. By the second day, people began to notice. Not him, just the absence of chaos. The usual flood of error reports had slowed. The dashboard that normally blinked with warnings now sat still. The engineers stopped whispering about outages and started asking, quietly, who had touched the core. No one had the answer. The third-party firm had gone silent. Their contract was under review, but no one had dared cancel it yet. Not with the board watching, not with quarterly targets approaching. Everyone still pretended progress was being made. But the CTO knew better. She pulled aside her lead developer and asked if anything had changed in the deployment pipeline. He shook his head, then paused. There had been a message. From a name he didn't recognize. "Try now." He showed it to her. She frowned. Searched the internal directory. Nothing. No title, no department. Just a guest login used in a lower floor workstation. She walked down herself. Found the desk. Empty now. But the terminal was still open. What she saw stopped her. The logs were clean. Not hacked, he wasn't covering his tracks. Just precise. She traced his trail backward. Patches issued. Error loops sealed. Latency buffers rewritten. Every move quiet. Every edit logged. No signatures. No notes. Just the kind of work that doesn't require introduction. She followed the trail all the way to the root access file and saw a comment. 3 words. "You're safe now." She blinked. Saved it. Didn't say anything. Instead, she sent a system-wide note to all technical leads. "If you're looking for answers, find the man without a badge." By the next morning, they had found him. He was sitting alone in a forgotten meeting room, writing documentation for the patches he'd applied. He had a paper notebook open. Not a brand. Just lines filled with sketches, call stacks, reminders. Someone knocked on the door. He didn't look up. "You're the one fixing it?" they asked. He nodded once. They asked where he came from. He gave them a city, a state, a decade of building in places no one cared about until they broke. They asked why he didn't say who he was. He looked up, said, "Would you have listened?" The silence answered everything. From that moment, the story began to change. Not officially, not yet, but engineers started coming to him instead of their leads. Project managers started asking him if their timelines were realistic. Someone put a chair next to his, then another, and soon, the man who wasn't qualified became the one person they couldn't move without. And still, the executive team didn't know, or pretended not to, because admitting he mattered meant admitting they'd missed something. And people who guard status rarely open the gates willingly. But the thing about saviors? They don't wait for permission. They walk through the fire anyway. By the third week, the company was running. Not limping, not staggering through technical debt. Actually running. The alerts that used to fire at random hours were now silent. The DevOps team slept through the night. The engineers pushed code without fear of rollback. It felt like the first breath after weeks underwater. Quiet, strange, weightless. And still, most of the leadership didn't know his name. He hadn't introduced himself to them. He hadn't needed to. He kept to the lower floors, the back rooms, the places where problems lived before they were PR risks. When the app's payment gateway failed to sync with international currencies, he patched it while eating a sandwich in the hallway. When customer support flagged a spike in refund requests, he traced it to a bug in the UX path no one had tested since launch. He didn't call meetings. He fixed things. That was his language. The head of engineering began sending junior devs to sit with him, not for approval, but to learn, to watch. One of them returned with a note on the corner of a napkin and said it taught her more than her entire internship. In rooms where product direction was decided, his name came up often, but never in full voice. No one wanted to admit the company was now dependent on a man they hadn't hired, hadn't vetted, hadn't deemed up to standard. The executive floor began to feel the shift. They were briefed on metrics. Stability had returned. User retention was up. The backlog had thinned. Someone asked what changed. They said, infrastructure caught up. They didn't mention the man in the faded t-shirt. But the investors noticed. They asked sharper questions. Wanted names behind the numbers. The CTO finally said it. "There's a contractor helping from ops." That was the phrase they used. A helper. Not the foundation. Not the reason the company was still alive. Andre didn't flinch when he heard it. He just smiled. Because he knew what it meant to be invisible until essential. He had built systems like that all his life. Things people only noticed once they stopped working. And he didn't need them to notice him. He needed them to stop bleeding. One morning, a junior executive stepped into the wrong meeting. He saw Andre leading a session on recovery architecture. Took a photo. Sent it in a group chat titled, "Wait, who is this guy?" The thread exploded. It made its way to the CEO's inbox. The subject line read, "Someone's running your company and it's not you." The CEO didn't react publicly. Not at first. The image sat in his inbox for hours, unopened, then reopened again. He knew the name by then. Had heard it whispered in updates that were too clean to be coincidence. But until that moment, he hadn't seen the face. Hadn't known the man who had quietly reversed the company's slow-motion collapse. He scheduled a meeting. Didn't put it on the calendar. Didn't use his assistant. He walked down to the floor he hadn't stepped foot on in over 6 months. The one near the servers. The one without glass walls. He found Andre sitting beside a stack of whiteboards. One screen open, 2 people beside him scribbling something about runtime elasticity. The CEO watched for a moment, then cleared his throat. Andre looked up. There was no surprise in his eyes. Only patience. "You've been busy," the CEO said. Andre nodded. "You've been absent." The words weren't cruel, just accurate. The CEO sat across from him. No one else spoke. They waited. Finally, he said, "We brought in 3 firms. Spent a fortune. You did it alone." Andre shrugged. "Not alone. Just quietly." The CEO leaned forward. "You weren't on the list. You weren't recommended. Your file didn't pass HR screen. Andre closed his laptop. Maybe your standards are calibrated to pedigree, not results. There was silence after that. Not tense. True. The CEO looked around, saw how the team deferred to Andre without fear, how their questions weren't filtered, how no one was trying to impress anyone, just build. Then he asked the real question. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Andre looked at him, measured the moment. Because people like me aren't invited to save companies like yours. And then, more softly, we're only allowed to do it when everything else has failed. That evening, the CEO sent a message to the board. Subject line, Emergency Leadership Alignment. The thread that followed was curt. They discussed naming Andre interim CTO. Some resisted. Too informal. Too unknown. One board member replied, doesn't fit our leadership image. The CTO forwarded the thread to Andre. He didn't reply. He printed the email, folded it, and slid it into the notebook where he kept everything no one else saw. Then he kept working. Because the company wasn't saved yet. It was just breathing again. And breath, while vital, is only the beginning of life. By the 5th week, Andre wasn't just solving problems, he was erasing the need for permission. Teams stopped waiting for sign-offs from people who hadn't touched code in years. Junior developers brought him diagrams before their leads. Product managers looped him in during ideation, not after. His presence shifted the center of gravity inside the company. Quietly. Permanently. And still, no one had updated his title. The executives argued over semantics. Some said calling him anything official would unsettle existing leadership. Others feared the board would object. One suggested giving him a special consultant status, enough authority to lead without actually naming him what he had become. He ignored them. Not out of disrespect. Out of priority. He spent mornings restructuring the onboarding system. Afternoons sketching infrastructure roadmaps with engineers who'd once considered quitting. Evenings he used to write the technical playbook the company had never had but always pretended to. His notebook grew thicker. Each page a blueprint for a company he didn't build on paper but was rebuilding in spirit. He ate lunch with customer support staff. He answered in-turn questions no one else made time for. He held 7 a.m. calls with users from emerging markets who had the worst product experiences. When they asked why he cared, he said, because you're still here. But above it all, something deeper was taking place. The company had begun to believe again. Not in growth charts or KPIs. In its own people. They started proposing ideas again, real ones, not the safe kind. Designers pushed back on executive decisions. Engineers challenged timelines without fear. Recruiters stopped filtering resumes based on schools. Because Andre had made it undeniable. Greatness doesn't come from fit. It comes from friction. From difference. From the very people the system tries to filter out. One day, the receptionist who first logged him in pulled him aside. I didn't know, she said. He smiled. You weren't supposed to. The CTO, no longer in denial, walked into the weekly executive sync with one sentence and no agenda. We either follow his lead or we lose everything he fixed. Silence followed. And then, finally, agreement. They offered him the title. Not interim. Not acting. CTO. Official. Documented. He read the offer. Then said no. He didn't need the title. He needed the system to remember how it was saved. He asked for something else. Full internal transparency. Hiring process rewrites. A founder's clause on bias mitigation. And a permanent seat for one junior employee on every major decision sprint. The board hesitated, but the metrics didn't. Numbers rose. Churn fell. PR stopped writing about crises and started writing about culture. And somewhere between a bug fix and a database migration, Andre became more than the man they underestimated. He became the model they'd one day claim was the plan all along. The 6th month didn't begin with a celebration. It began with a quiet deployment. A full system overhaul, pushed live without ceremony, without error. The kind of release that most companies feared. But this one moved like water through channels carved by weeks of care. It just worked. No headlines. No applause. Just silence. The good kind. The kind that follows clarity. Andre walked the floor that morning like he always did, hoodie, notebook, phone on airplane mode. The office had changed. Same walls. Same desks. But everything inside had shifted. People moved differently. Meetings started later and ended better. Feedback didn't trickle upward, it flowed sideways, in every direction. Respect had stopped being hierarchical. It had become functional. Earned, shared, lived. He stopped by the old conference room. The one where they'd once told him he wasn't a fit. The door was open. Inside, a few new hires were going through orientation. He listened for a while. No one mentioned resumes. They talked about purpose, about grit, about building with hands that had been told no too many times and did it anyway. That was enough. Upstairs, the CEO prepared a press release. They were going public soon. The turnaround story was too perfect not to tell. But the problem with perfect stories is they're usually lies dressed in clean language. He wrote a draft, deleted it, wrote another. Still wrong. Then he walked downstairs, stood in front of Andre's desk, and asked a question most people in his position never learned to ask. What do you want them to remember? Andre didn't look up right away. Just finished typing something, then closed the lid of his laptop. He said, "Don't tell them what I did." The CEO frowned. "Then what?" "Tell them what we almost lost." And that was the truth. Because this company hadn't just lost its systems or its users. It had almost lost its soul. Andre stepped out of the building just as the afternoon light bent across the skyline. He didn't look back. Not out of pride, but peace. He had given them more than code, more than recovery. He had given them memory. A living one. And they wouldn't forget him. Not because he demanded it. Because they knew who kept the walls from falling when the roof was already gone. And the next time someone walked through that door, underqualified, underdressed, underestimated, they'd think twice before saying, "You're not up to our level." Because now they understood. The person you overlook might be the only one who can save you.